Down with Drew Thompson, who is running for U.S. Congress. As you know, Ability PAC is working to educate the disability community in regards to candidates, their beliefs and their thoughts, and how they will help to advocate for the disability community. Drew, I know in the past you had previously sat on the board of Autism Society of Indiana. Could you share a little bit about that and your activities with them and your involvement, please?
Sure, I'd love to. I was recruited to the board by a very good friend and then worked with the leadership there at the time, Dana Renee. The Autism Society of Indiana, one of the strongest organizations of leaders, I think, in the country around the issues of autism, with a great community-based, great support system from Riley Hospital, with the School of Philanthropy here in Indianapolis, and with a lot of community-based groups that deal with everything from applied behavioral analytics to the medical issues related to autism, as well as development of young adults with autism and career paths for them. So the Autism Society was a phenomenal organization. I am an attorney, so I helped out in addressing a number of legal issues that came up along the way, and was on their board for a couple of years.
Wonderful,
recently.
wonderful. Well, one of the questions we had today was in regards to Uber. As you know, Uber has exceeded and done very well in a lot of the markets. Uber operates under different legalities than the taxi cab industry, and primarily regarding transportation vehicles. They're not regulated to have X amount of vehicles that are handicapped accessible. What are some things that you think that we could do to kind of help the disability community with that?
I'm sure there's a great deal that can be done. I believe that the private sector always responds when there are signals and incentives that tell people in the private sector there is a need, number one, there is a market opportunity, number one, and then there are people around it that will find ways to make things happen. So with respect to Uber, I think awareness to Uber is the number one issue. Uber was designed as a company to really disrupt government regulation and to stay away from the systems that have kind of crippled the taxi cab industry over the past 20 or 30 years. And so with Uber, I think that groups like the Autism Society of Indiana, other support groups for people with disabilities, reaching out to Uber, reaching out to other nonprofits that support the disability community, there's a whole lot that can be done. Every one of these problems is a multifaceted, multi-step process that needs to be dealt with. But I think actively focusing on awareness, being part of the solution, and not contributing more to the problem is where you begin.
That's wonderful. That's very good. Thank you for taking the time to answer that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
And then also in regards to just fiscal responsibility, as you know, the disability community, whether it's funding for education, for health care, you know, a lot of the folks with disability benefits, how can we ensure that those benefit programs are in place, remain sustainable to help future generations of the disability community?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you say programs remain in place, okay, I want to, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift the semantics a little bit, because I don't think it's about the programs, because there's so many government programs that have not succeeded. You saw my sign a few minutes ago. In America, we've had a war on poverty, a war on drugs, a war on terror. None of them have worked. Government program after government program has been tried and failed. So it's not about the programs, it's about the solutions, okay? And in terms of solutions for the disability community, I do believe that that is one of the foremost priorities for our country domestically. Okay, if we're going to have any social spending, if there's going to be any form of redistribution through a more voluntary type of system of taxation, then our first priorities ought to be people who are not in a position to take care of themselves. Okay, and those are going to be children, the very elderly, and those with disabilities. So I don't believe entirely that in the elimination of government-aided services to those people. Government doesn't do anything other than pass laws, fight wars, and make judicial decisions about them. It's the people involved. I mean, government is always supporting outside organizations. So I do think that is one of our nation's highest priorities, but I agree very wholeheartedly with our presidential candidate in the Libertarian Party, Gary Johnson, who says we're never going to attack a problem of $19 trillion of debt if we don't cut a lot of what's already out there, if we don't eliminate, kind of reset and start over, pick our priorities, and one of the major priorities has to be people with disabilities.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very good. Another question is, as you know, 25 states have legalized for medical cannabis. There are currently studies in regards to cannabis for post-traumatic stress disorder, autism, and several other disease states. How, as a candidate, do you see medical cannabis and its value for certain health needs?
Well, I mean, tremendously valuable, and I think it's not just unfortunate, it's tyrannical that our government has prevented people from using a substance that has so many health benefits for so very long. This is a multi-generational issue. I've seen a lot of commentary during this campaign year about the war on drugs being initiated in or about 1972, but the truth is that cannabis has been illegal at the federal level since at least 1939. So, you know, we've lived, in neither of our lifetimes has it ever been legal to use cannabis any place but Colorado. Now, medically, it's been allowed to be used in a number of other states in the recent past, but it hasn't been legal anywhere, and the federal government still holds the threat over the heads of the state of Colorado on how cannabis can be used. Cannabis should be legalized. We should move toward a system where substances are considered usable as a matter of individual free choice. People have to make decisions for themselves. Only when they're endangering the safety of others actively, by driving a vehicle when intoxicated or doing something of that nature, should government be involved in regulation of those activities.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very good. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. One of the other questions I had for you is regards to, there's a movie that's out there, documented called Vaxxed. Right now, there's a lot of concern regarding mandatory vaccinations, in particular with the state of California. They have removed all religious exemptions for vaccination. And there was also a Florida congresswoman who also submitted legislation requiring the same thing for public education. Now, in turning that question more so regarding last year, Congressman Bill Posey submitted to Congress documentation in regards to potential fraud at the CDC. Dr. Thompson submitted that they, in fact, regarding their studies regarding the MMR, that those studies may have been altered. Would you be willing to support subpoenaing CDC whistleblower Dr. Bill Thompson to the Congress to have him testify under oath?
Well, of course, I think if we're going to have government involved in theoretically the protection of the safety of families and individuals, then there has to be transparency. If Dr. Thompson has this information, which has been cited and documented, he should be able and should come forward and account for what that information is at this point in time. He's got Fifth Amendment rights just like any of us do, and those ought to be protected to the extent necessary and possible. Now, you know, that gets into a lot of legal issues. I'm not going to try to address them here and now, but yes, I absolutely believe that Dr. Thompson should come forward. I will say this, I don't think that it is appropriate or necessary for us to try to create a circus around the issue when there are probably some more simple solutions. If we had transparency in the beginning, if we had the private marketplace actively involved and engaged in determining the safety of vaccinations, if we had alternatives available, then we might have a much better, safer, and usable vaccination process today without the huge cloud of suspicion that is hanging over our heads because government acts as if it is there for the protection of our safety when in fact there's so much being put at risk.
Wonderful. And then in terms of individual liberties in regards to mandatory, do you support certain, either medical exemptions or religious exemptions from vaccinations?
Well, I mean, I do support religious exemptions for a lot of things. I think the free exercise of religion is what it is. It's about the exercise of religion. Now, there have been a lot of commentary during this year's election cycle about, whether free exercise of religion and commerce overlap. I don't think that's necessarily the case. The way people want to exercise their religious practice is their own business. But this is much more fundamental than that. I do not believe that government should intervene in the decisions of a parent at any level. Now, if we're going to have systems of education where everyone can attend and there is a real immediate risk of harm to other people by a non-vaccinated child attending that place, then there has to be some allowances for safety provisions for the other students. That is a legitimate function of government. On the other hand, it's absolutely the right of the parent to make the decision about when and how their child should be vaccinated, and they should have the best information available to them they can get.
Wonderful. Very good. Thank you. As you know, Ability PAC will be interviewing other candidates. Ability PAC is a nonpartisan, non-connected PAC. Basically what that means is that we do not endorse any candidate. However, we think it's very important that today 1 in 5 has a disability and 52% of the population identifies as having a family member or someone else with the disability. That in itself is a huge segment of the population, and by far, with having a very educated disability community, we will be able to vote smartly to help identify candidates that support the disability community. And Drew, I'm going to ask you one more question. What would be your role as far as, when you get to Congress, how would you be willing to help to support the disability community? Are there any policies or anything, other focuses that you'd like to discuss today regarding the disability community?
Yeah, 3 things that I think are really important. Number one, as private citizens go as public servants to Congress. So my role is as a private citizen. My role is to be an advocate. My role is to be an advocate for the people of my district, my constituency, and those things that I care about and I'm passionate about with respect to our nation as a whole. Secondly, again, as a private citizen, to be involved with the disability community. I have in my life, I've served on the board of the Autism Society of Indiana. I hope to have much more involvement with similar organizations in the future. And third, I think this is really important, Carlos. I think it's very important to understand that one of the reasons I want to go to Washington is to change the dynamic. Well, I have said, and I'm committed to the priority of caring for people with disabilities in our country, and the more opportunity we can create to do that privately, the better. One of the things I do want to do is to end the cycle of corruption that exists in our nation's capital, where as politicians we act as if we're selling favors, and as business owners and attorneys, we act as if we're buying favors from the politicians. If we don't continue the money cycle in the way we have in the past, we can end that corruption. So we've got to be advocates, public service, private citizens, but not big spenders. That's not the solution. The solutions exist in our highly innovative and terrific private sector.
Wonderful. Very good. That concludes our interview, and this will be posted on Ability PAC and then also posted to our YouTube channel. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you, Drew, for your time as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Carlos.
Yep.
Hope to see you again soon.